Ahead of the meeting with Farmers Union Ministers Arjun Munda, Piyush Goyal and Nityanand Rai meet Punjab Chief Minister in Chandigarh. Bhagwant Mann joins the meeting with Kisan leaders. Mamata Banerjee speaks on the Sandeshkhali rape and torture allegations, calls it a BJP RSS conspiracy, backs absconding TMC Neta Sheikh Shahjahan. Big political quake before the 24 elections. Former Jammu and Kashmir Chief Minister Farooq Abdullah hints at joining the NDA in the future, says cannot rule out this possibility. Also says seat-sharing chalk talks with the India alliance have failed. Setback for Sharad Pawar. Maharashtra Assembly Speaker says Ajit Pawar faction is the real NCP and that Ajit faction MLAs cannot be disqualified. Days after 8 Navy veterans were freed, Prime Minister Modi meets the Emir of Qatar, holds bilateral meeting. Prime Minister Modi accorded ceremonial welcome during his Qatar visit. The Supreme Court has struck down electoral bonds as unconstitutional. The Apex Court has directed the State Bank of India to stop issuing electoral bonds with immediate effect and submit data of all donors to the Election Commission of India. The opposition is hailing this verdict as historic. The BJP says the aim of electoral bonds was to bring transparency and the verdict will have no impact on the elections.
A 7-year-old election funding system scrapped. The Supreme Court has ruled electoral bonds to be unconstitutional.
The electoral bond scheme and the impugned provisions to the extent that they infringe upon the right to information of the voter by anonymizing contributions through electoral bonds are violative of Article 19(1)(a). We have applied the proportionality standard to determine if the infringement of the right to information is justified.
Introduced in 2017 and first sold in 2018, the secretive electoral bonds were touted as revolutionary for political donations. Critics argued that the anonymity provided by the scheme led to corruption and an unfair advantage among political parties.
At a primary level, political contributions give a seat at the table to the contributor. That is, it enhances access to legislators. This access also translates into influence over policy making.
Individuals or companies could buy tax-exempt bonds ranging from 1,000 rupees to 1 crore rupees from the SBI, which were then given to chosen political parties and later exchanged for cash. Data showed that between 2018 and March 2022, the majority of these donations went to the BJP. Headed by the CGI, the 5-judge bench directed the State Bank of India to cease issuing electoral bonds, reveal buyer identities, and provide information on bond redemption by political parties. The Supreme Court's decision came in response to petitions challenging the amendments made by the Finance Act 2017 that established the electoral bonds scheme.
Big day for Indian democracy, big day for transparency, big day for the right to information under 19(1)(a), big day for striking out clearly unconstitutional provisions, big day for bringing transparency into the political system, big day for exposing political parties who are participating in scams, biggest scams in the history of this country in the last many years. It's a big day for many, many, many reasons.
The opposition welcomed the decision. Congress leader Rahul Gandhi denounced electoral bonds as a means for kickbacks.
How can 95% of the proceeds of electoral bonds go to one political party, which is the ruling party? Therefore, our question is, in lieu of that money, have you sold, have you given coal mines to those companies? Have you allowed those companies to operate airports? What is the quid pro quo? This is our question.
Conversely, the BJP maintained that the scheme aimed to bring transparency to electoral donations.
चुनाव में सुधार के लिए ये हमारी मोदी जी की सरकार का एक प्रयास नहीं था, आपको याद होगा वोटर लिस्ट पर आपकी फोटो छपती है, ये भी उस समय हुआ था ना। आज बड़ी संख्या में जो ईवीएम्स लाए गए उससे बूथ कैप्चरिंग बंद हुई है ना। ये भी उसी प्रामाणिक प्रयास में चुनाव को पारदर्शी बनाने का प्रयास था। अब माननीय सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने एक फैसला किया है तो हम उनका सम्मान करते हैं।
This ruling arrives nearly 2 months ahead of the Lok Sabha elections. With Nalini Sharma, Bureau Report, India Today.
So will the Supreme Court's order on electoral bonds make Indian elections more transparent, or will it have the opposite effect? And can the Supreme Court's order be implemented with retrospective effect? Because remember, when these electoral bonds were bought, a promise was made to the donors that their names would be kept secret. Now the Supreme Court wants to change that. So is that even good in law? To talk about all of this and more, I'm joined on this broadcast by S.Y. Qureshi, former Chief Election Commissioner of India. Anjali Bhardwaj joins us, well-known RTI activist. We've got Amitabh Sinha, who's an advocate from the Supreme Court. And I just want to tell our viewers that the BJP has officially decided not to join this debate. The government is preparing the grounds to challenge this order in the Supreme Court, and therefore their party spokespeople are not joining this conversation. I want to go across to S.Y. Qureshi on the Supreme Court order, why you think that this is the right thing, why you think transparency will improve as a result of this, and this concern that how can a promise which was made to donors when they bought these electoral bonds from 2017 onwards, that their names will be kept a secret, now be broken by the Supreme Court order which asks the Election Commission to share the names of all those who donated. They've told the SBI to give the names to the Election Commission. Is that okay in law? What are you making of the Supreme Court order? S.Y. Qureshi.
Yeah, I believe that this is a landmark judgment and it is for transparency. And I would like to recall when the scheme was introduced through the budget of 2017, the then finance minister, his opening statement itself is worth remembering and recalling. He said, without transparency of political funding, free and fair elections are not possible. This was music to our ears because that is what we Election Commission have been demanding. His second sentence was equally good. He said, for the last 70 years, we have failed to achieve that transparency. Now, naturally, the third sentence should have brought in the transparency, which is what we expected. Third sentence cancelled the entire thing. And what kind of transparency was brought in? Now there will be electoral bonds. So much so that the transparency which existed then disappeared in one stroke. And what was the transparency then? Any donation of more than 20,000 rupees, just 20,000 rupees, was reported to the Election Commission. And Election Commission certified that they have, the donor has told us, on the basis of that certificate, they will get their income tax exemption, which otherwise they were not eligible to. Now, in one stroke, that transparency of donation was taken away. Now, 20 crores, 200 crores, 2,000 crores, nobody will know. Is that transparency? It is strange that taking away the transparency and calling and protecting secrecy, the argument given that the donor wants secrecy. I have a question. The donor has been donating for the previous 70 years. They never demanded secrecy and they were donating to all the political parties, and there was no reprisal by any party against any party, and the parties are winning and losing all the time, and many donors were donating to opposite candidates, all the parties at the same time, so that whoever wins or loses, it didn't matter to them. Then suddenly where was the question of secrecy? So all that was fraught with the unfairness. And that has what has been exposed by the Supreme Court. They have talked of transparency. They have talked of citizens' right to know. Something which was first established in 2003. When we know about the criminal antecedents of candidates, the financial background. Why? Because ADR and others had gone to the Supreme Court under the right to information that we should know who our candidates are.
So I want to show our viewers how much money has actually been taken by which party through these electoral bonds. So here's the data that we have in the public domain. This is from 2017 onwards. About 57% of the funds that have been raised have actually been for the BJP. So the big chunk has been for the BJP. That's the biggest bar graph there. Then the Congress, which is about 1,123 crores, the TMC 1,093 crores, the BJD 774 crores. The biggest number, of course, is the BJP, which is 6,566. I want to show this to you as a percentage. So if you look at the percentage, about 57.3% of the total, about 11,450 crores of electoral bonds were for the BJP. About 10% for the Congress, 9.5% for the Trinamool, 6.7% for the Biju Janata Dal, 5% for the DMK, and so on. But about 57% was for one party, which is the BJP. The fact, though, is, Anjali Bhardwaj, that if this had been a period between 2004 to 2014, and if we looked at the same data, it's highly probable that at that time the Congress was getting the biggest chunk of donations. So we don't know whether things have really changed very much, because you've got now a situation where the Supreme Court has said that reveal the names since 2017-18, which if I were a donor, I'd be very uncomfortable with, because a promise was made to me when I gave the money to whichever party I did as an electoral bond. Now suddenly, 6 years later, the Supreme Court changes its mind, reverses this decision and just scraps electoral bonds. Do you think that's a fair and right thing to do, Anjali Bhardwaj?
Well, Rahul, what I would like to start by saying is that the Supreme Court has really upheld people's right to know. We know that when political parties, whichever party might be, we might talk about, whether it's a BJP or the Congress or any other party, doesn't matter. But when a big corporate is giving money to a political party, they are doing it for a consideration. There is a problem of a quid pro quo. If somebody is giving money to a political party, then that corporate expects the party, when it comes to power, to work for the interest of that particular company. Now, people, when they go to vote, should know who is funding which political party, so that they can exercise their right to vote in an informed manner. Because without having this information, when I cast my vote, I'm doing it in an uninformed manner, and it is violating Article 19(1)(a) of the Constitution, which is my right to free speech and expression, from which the right to information flows. So I think we need to remember that that's what the court has upheld. It is true that a very large chunk of the funding through electoral bonds has come to the BJP, as you have shown. And there have been problems which were presented before the court during the course of hearings, that the manner in which the electoral bond scheme was imagined did not leave scope for a level playing field. We have a situation where people do not know who is funding whom through electoral bonds, and the opposition parties have no way of knowing. The Election Commission has no way of knowing.
No, but isn't it better then to reform the scheme and try and make the tweaks to make it more transparent rather than scrap the process completely?
I think the inherent problem with the electoral bond scheme and the 4 laws that were amended, Rahul, it's very important, I think, to bring that up front, that the electoral bond scheme was brought in along with 4 amendments that were made to important laws. The amendments were basically they curbed people's right to information. So when we are looking at the judgment today, the judgment holds not just the electoral bond scheme unconstitutional, it also holds the amendments made to the Companies Act, the IT Act, RP Act, also unconstitutional. So this entire scheme is really just to give anonymity to the donations.
No, but how are we better off now? See, this is the point, Anjali Bhardwaj. How are we better off now? Now that the scheme has been scrapped, how will this election be more transparent? All the payments will be made through the previous means, which is to pay anonymously. It's not as if they're declaring who the donors are. So how are we better off with this judgment?
Yeah, there's a very simple answer to that question, Rahul. Earlier, there was cash through which people could or companies could give donations, and there were banking channels. The electoral bonds, when they were brought, were expected to bring in greater transparency. Instead, they were a regressive step, which introduced greater anonymity. So nothing else changed. People could donate through cash or through banking channels along with electoral bonds, and they will continue to do so even after electoral bonds are scrapped. Today's judgment has just made sure that the regressive amendments that were made to the four laws and the very regressive electoral bond scheme has been scrapped. So the difference that is going to come is that we will not have these floodgates of anonymous, unlimited funds through the banking channel going into political parties. This was completely harming people's and voters' right to information. That will stop.
Amitabh Sinha, now this is embarrassing from the government's perspective. You present a scheme which is supposed to bring transparency. The fact is it doesn't bring any transparency. There is greater anonymity. The State Bank of India knows. The State Bank of India is a public sector bank. The perception would be that the SBI would naturally, if asked by the government, inform the ruling party of the day who is funding the opposition. There's no way of knowing that, but that charge can always be leveled. And nobody else is any the wiser. So how was this scheme working to enhance transparency is a question very clearly in the eyes of the Supreme Court judges couldn't be answered properly by the government, which is why they struck it down.
Thank you, Rahul, for giving me the opportunity to speak something which is very, very important for the Indian democracy now, today, especially. With all respectful, submissions for Mr. Qureshi, not as person, but as election commissioner, and Ms. Anjali, let me give you my mind. So as a Supreme Court practicing lawyer with full responsibility, I am giving this statement, so don't be afraid. I am saying that if the Right to Information Act is applicable, the right to information is applicable, the yardstick should be for everybody, meaning all institutions, for executive, for legislative, for judiciary as well. So my point is very clear. If the yardsticks are common and equal, then that right to information should be applicable to the decisions of the collegium
that's
also.
Not the answer to the question. The question is around electoral bonds, and the question is about how you promised that this scheme would enhance transparency, whereas in reality it didn't.
Rahul, give me only uninterrupted, only 1 minute. I am repeating this point of argument everywhere, and then as usual, people and the channels are really scared about the Supreme Court's arrangement. That's why they are curtailing my point. But my point is now clear. Now I am coming to those points. See, Mr. Qureshi was the election commissioner during that black money time. See, black money is very, very important to corrupt the political process. And why I am telling you, I am not here as the advocate for any political party. I am here as a Supreme Court lawyer and a citizen of the country. Here, my point is very clear that if the transparency was being planned, why the timing is very important. Why it happened only 2 months, 3 months before this election. So in Ram Janmabhoomi case, the case was deferred for next election. Here, the system was running, but never mind. I am not going to.
You're not answering the question. You're just dancing around in circles without answering the question.
I am coming.
I want to put it down. You have to come very quickly. If you're a lawyer, you should get to the point faster, sir.
That point. I am coming to the point. The basic problem is the percentage of grant, percentage of the donation. The percentage is coming because, see, basic theory is that if I have faith in any government or any policy of any government, I will certainly try to think that government should come back. Number one. Number two, if I am...
No, but none of this answers the question of how... I want to go across to Aditya Shankar Prasad. I've given you enough an opportunity, you haven't been able to explain. Aditya Shankar Prasad, the government hasn't been able to convince the courts that electoral bonds enhance transparency. Any right-minded person would say that there was high opacity which existed previously, the opacity continued, and therefore the Supreme Court has struck this down. And it's quite embarrassing for the government because you presented it in a fashion that it was meant to enhance transparency, but the lordships don't seem convinced at all.
Well, certainly they have their own entitlement to understand the implication of the law. But let's go back to 2017 when the law was being formulated. This was a novel conception that was brought to the country for the first time. The concept of the concept of electoral bonds for political donation. Now, whatever the concept is, it was a novel concept. The judgment has come out today, and surely the Supreme Court has laid down certain points on which some consideration is required to be done. But shouldn't there be a process in which there should be some kind of legitimacy when it comes to electoral funding? I mean, I fail to understand the logic behind it. At least,
no, but that's not answering the question. The question is, how did the process in the way that it was set up enhance transparency? I mean, it benefited the government. 60% of the funds went to the BJP, that we know, but it didn't really serve the purpose with which these bonds were brought by Mr. Jaitley.
I think it's too early to judge on that, because it was a concept which has just been started some time back.
No, we've had it we've had it now for 7 years. That's enough time to judge whether I think the elections are getting more transparent or not through electoral bonds. They weren't.
No, I think, Rahul, you have a very valid point, but I want to just highlight one point. You see, the Supreme Court has made certain observations, and the Supreme Court has been very categorically critical of the government insofar as the electoral funding is concerned. I think it's a detailed judgment which one will have to scrutinize, because we've just gotten the part of that order. Need to understand that in what context it has been said. But certain key observations that have been made by the Supreme Court is very relevant for the evolution of India's democracy, is what I understand. And surely this might be an anti-BJP judgment or anti-Congress judgment. As a lawyer of the Apex Court and as somebody who believes in the Constitution of India, I think it is surely a very welcome stand that the Supreme Court has taken to bring in more accountability and transparency. But having said so, as a lawyer of the court and as an Indian citizen, I respect the judgment of the court. We need to understand in what are the conditions on which the Supreme Court has mandated an order of this nature. Well, probably there might have been some difference of opinion, but only when the judgment comes about, one can go through it and understand.
S.Y. Qureshi, from what I understand from government sources, they're planning to move to the Supreme Court seeking a review. And when they seek a review, the argument that they're going to make is that this is the rule with which this scheme was brought. You can bring it in with effect from the future, that anybody who donates now knows that his name will be made public, and then they can decide whether they wish to vote or not, whether they wish to donate or not. But you can't change it retrospectively. You can't say now make your names public. Nobody will have any faith in any system, because if that is the premise under which the donation was made, can that premise be changed retrospectively? How do you explain that, S.Y. Qureshi?
No, the scheme and the law which was passed, the Supreme Court after 2 years, 3 years or 10 years, if it makes it, if it declares it unconstitutional, it has to happen with retrospective effect. And secondly...
No, but that's unfair to all the donors, sir. While I agree that the scheme is not transparent and it hasn't enhanced transparency and opacity remains as it was, how is it fair? Take any company, I don't want to take any names, take any company who donate to any party, now suddenly their names will be made public.
Then let me come to that. You know, the case was pending before the Supreme Court for 6-7 years, and the donors are not illiterate. They knew that the case could have gone any which way, which it has. Therefore, they would have been conscious of the fact that someday their names will be disclosed.
No, that's a very weak argument, Mr. Qureshi. I'm sorry. No, sir, I'm sorry. That's a weak argument you're making.
Hold on. Secondly, if they now challenge the thing, that will only prove the point that there was something secret. There was some quid pro quo which they are trying to hide. If it was an innocent donation to a political party, which happens all the time in all countries, what is there for them to hide?
No, that's not the point. It's the premise of a contract. It's the bedrock of all legal contracts, where you have an understanding, good, bad, ugly. You can change it from the future, that from now our contracts will be different, but you can't change it retrospectively. Anjali Bharadwaj, can you offer a better explanation? Because everybody I'm asking this is just dancing around in circles.
Well, Rahul, let me begin by saying that it has taken a very long time for the Supreme Court to pronounce this judgment. People moved the court back in 2017 when the amendments to the laws were brought to facilitate the bringing in of the electoral bond scheme, and therefore I agree that this judgment should have come perhaps much earlier. And in fact, we've been very worried because there's been a general election that has happened. There have been repeatedly state elections that have been happening with the electoral bonds very much intact. But let me also tell you, Rahul, another point on retrospective amendments. If you recall, the FCRA, the Foreign Contribution Regulatory Act, when the BJP and the Congress party were found in violation of the FCRA, what did they do? They simply went and retrospectively amended the FCRA to say that, look, now we will say that not only going forward, we will accept foreign funds, we will also accept them retrospectively. Whatever happened after the court declared them in violation of the FCRA, they said we are changing the law retrospectively. So now as citizens, we are seeing these kind of things happen in our political system, unfortunately, repeatedly. And what is happening now is that a foreign company, if it sets up an Indian subsidiary, it can channel funds into a political party. Through electoral bonds, the big concern was that the Companies Act was amended, and there was this fear which the RBI in fact wrote to the finance ministry about before the electoral bonds were brought in, to say that this will just increase black money in the system. There will be money laundering that will happen through these bonds, and there will be unlimited amounts of money that are unaccounted for, that will even come from foreign sources.
No, but I just want to tell our viewers that Article 20 of the Indian Constitution prohibits the legislature to make retrospective criminal laws. It doesn't prohibit a civil liability retrospectively, but it prohibits any criminal law being brought in retrospectively. And in the landmark judgment of Kedarnath versus the state of West Bengal, the Supreme Court held that when an act is declared a criminal offence by the legislature and provides penalties for it, such declaration is always prospective and cannot be applied retrospectively as part provisions of Article 21. I want to give our viewers a very simple example. Take, for example, the voluntary income disclosure scheme, SY Qureshi. Now, for whatever reason, if somebody makes a voluntary disclosure, because the finance minister at that time promises that their name will be kept secret, later you say, no, now I will make your name public. But that just then spooks everybody, right? Then I don't believe anything that the government is saying, because you're taking money from me, saying that this is voluntary and suddenly making it public.
Yeah, quite right. At the same time, let me tell you, in VDI scheme also, we have seen that many of those people were subjected to investigation later on. Immediately they were given relief, but later on they were investigated. So to that extent, the government did not keep the promise. But if you allow me to come back to Anjali's point, now the retrospective change in the act was not by 1 or 2 years, by more than 40 years. And getting foreign money, it has serious security implications. Foreign countries can interfere in an election, which is the reality. Russia was accused of interfering in US election. So that can happen here. If such serious things can happen with the retrospective effect, why are we considering it so innocent in this case?
Sujata Paul of this Congress is also with us. Sujata Paul, where does the Congress party come out on the Supreme Court judgment and the fact that the government seems to be laying the grounds to go out and ask for a review before the Supreme Court?
The Congress party opposed the electoral bonds and has been opposing it since 2017. And it is one of our leaders, Jaya Thakurji, who is also one of the petitioners. Now, we have been making constant representations to the EC regarding the electoral bonds. But I do want to go back to the period that you were mentioning, and the ADR report says that 3,982 crores went to the Congress party at that time, and 3,272 crores went to the BJP.
Ma'am, how much of it was anonymous? How much of it was in cash, black money, anonymously given to the Congress party to fight elections? I'm not saying that happens only with the Congress, but that's the reality. That's what these electoral bonds were meant to change.
Now, that's what I'm coming to. Now, if there are problems over there in that particular system, things need to change. And we all agree to that. However, do not forget that in 2014, the BJP government came to power, And this law was brought in 2017. And whoever would be in power would be helped by this scheme. So the electoral bonds have helped them much more. Another very important thing is if something is invalid, illegal, unconstitutional, and even if it has happened because the government has brought in the scheme, doesn't make it legal. When the Honorable Supreme Court says that this has to be struck down, it clearly means that there was something wrong. And there were not just 4 laws, 5 laws were changed at that time. Why did they have to change those laws? Because they wanted to benefit from corporates. And if corporates have been benefited, the right to privacy is that more important, or the right to information of the voter? Because in a democracy, it is always the voter who is supreme. It is my right as a citizen of this country, as a voter of this country, to know who is getting how much and how he is benefiting from the party that comes to power. Should we know that or shouldn't we? I think that is what I would like to say.
But Qureshi, how does this impact this election? The fact that, in a few days from now, the date of polling will be announced somewhere in the second week of March, most likely. With this scheme gone, now this review will be filed. I assume it will take a certain amount of time before it's heard. This election would likely be over. So how does this impact funding of this election? I don't see how we are better off without these electoral bonds. I mean, now it's all anonymous, black money, like it used to be in days gone by.
Yeah, I don't think it will have much impact on the coming election because most of the transactions have already taken place. Only one tranche was left. So that may be affected, not that it will completely stop. And secondly, something which was being repeatedly mentioned by you particularly, it is true that Election Commission was also expressing concern that 70% of all donations were coming by cash, which was not transparent. We were against it then. Now, I have written and said many times that in this scheme, instead of cash, it is a banking transaction. Very, very fine. Stick to that. All we wanted, please disclose the donor and the recipient. It was a 30-second reform, and if it had been done, we would not have come to such a pass.
No, but if it had operated properly, then there may not have been a problem. The problem here, Aditya Shankar Prasad, is that the government knows who's funding the opposition. The opposition doesn't know who's funding the government. Even though the government claims they don't know, but they have obviously ways of being able to find out, and that's where the Supreme Court had a problem.
No, I think the judgment of the Supreme Court is a very laudable judgment, and there are certain positive suggestions that can also be incorporated. That is for the people in the government to decide. But having said so, I think the fact that a novel initiative was initiated to bring some kind of transparency and accountability, and infuse some kind of a clear-headed funding process in the Indian electoral system, that is a laudable initiative. Number one. Number two, insofar as the Supreme Court is concerned, of course, there are issues relating to transparency and the privacy of the donor and everything. But I think one has to see in the larger context of the judgment. Till the time I do not read the judgment, I will not comment on it because there are certain legal issues.
No, but Anjali Bhardwaj, I don't understand how we are better off. Now that the scheme is gone, you're saying, oh, it's great that we've struck it down. How are we better off now for this election, which is one of the biggest elections in the world this year?
Bad or good. It's a democratic process. A legislation is challenged in a court of law. The court of law has the right to make certain observations. Observations can be debated upon. That is how a democracy evolves. I have no problem with that. But yes, one thing is there, certain suggestions have been made. Once one goes to the judgment, one can see what is doable, what is not doable, and that is up to the government to make.
Okay, Anjali Bhardwaj, how are we better off with this judgment than we were before this?
So Rahul, like Mr. Qureshi said, a lot of transactions have already happened. There has been money which has been given already to the political parties in the run-up to the 2024 elections through electoral bonds. And therefore, for many of us, I think as citizens, it would have been very useful to have this judgment much earlier. But be it as it may, the reality is that now going forward, even before the 24 elections, but even beyond that, this particular scheme, this particular instrument, which was really causing much more opacity in the funding process, has been stopped, and I think that that's a very welcome thing. I think if we are looking for solutions on what needs to be done to improve our political party funding scenario, to reduce black money and corruption, there are many solutions. One of them, of course, is that already the Central Information Commission of India has said that national political parties must come under the ambit of the Right to Information Act. They must appoint public information officers and give citizens information, so there is no anonymity in party funding. I think all political parties are sitting in what we can only call uncivil disobedience. None of them
is the Congress willing to do that? You haven't done it so far, Sujata Paul. Why doesn't the opposition show the way and say, okay, we will make ourselves available for queries under the RTI?
Absolutely. We have a Donate for Desh, scheme happening. I mean, we are doing a fundraising, and it's completely transparent. But what is good about this is that the money and political nexus, that has to be thrashed, and that has been struck at. So what the Supreme Court has done today should be welcomed, and is being welcomed by every single voter of this country, because it is my right that there should be no nexus which influences my vote or uses my vote to better their own selves. And if the corporates are the ones who are donating as much as they have, and nobody can deny that 1 crore rupees cannot be donated by individuals. If this amount has be donated by a number of people, as reports suggest, it means that this is corporate funding, and they will not do it without a quid pro quo in place. And that is what the Supreme Court
does that mean everyone who funded you also got a quid pro quo? I mean, look at what you're saying. You've been a party that's been in power for 50 years.
No, so what I'm saying is that we are not in power. And secondly,
no, but when you were in power, whoever funded you got a quid pro quo.
That's it. Exactly my point. Whoever is in power always has an advantage, because I said that BJP was already in power when this scheme was brought in. So obviously, whoever was donating money to them knew that they were going to benefit, and that is why they were giving the money to them. Because if the party had the money, they could campaign better.
Okay, I think no party, frankly, comes out smelling of roses in this. You're kind of admitting that the Congress also had the same scenario where whoever voted,
Rahul,
whoever donated to the Congress would have had some kind of a quid pro quo. Anyway, that's not the argument here. The argument...
No, Rahul.
Yes.
One small thing. Why is it that the RBI raised objections about it? The ECI also raised objections about it. The Law Commission objected. So this means that the system was not
foolproof. So I think it's quite clear to any right-thinking citizen that electoral bonds in the way that they were implemented were not bringing any greater transparency. Most of the money was going to the government. The government knew or had the ways and means of knowing who was funding the opposition. The opposition had no idea about who was funding the government and what kind of money was being given. It was all happening through banking channels. It wasn't happening through black money. Are we better off without electoral bonds, or should the scheme have been tweaked to make things more transparent, to reduce the level of opacity, and can it be implemented with retrospective effect? I think that would really be the nub of any review in the Supreme Court, where the question will really be, can you now ask people or tell people that we'll make your name public, whereas when they paid the money, made the donation, it was promised to them that the names would not be made public. And if that's the case, then would any contract have any validity? Because anybody can wake up any day and change that. So those are the aspects that will get debated in court. We'll track this very carefully. I want to thank S.Y. Qureshi, Anjali Bhardwaj, Sujata Paul, Aditya Shankar Prasad for joining me on the Newstrack. We're slipping into a quick break. When we come back, Sandeshkhali showdown escalates. Mamata Banerjee calls women who claim rape and torture by AMC Neta agents of the BJP. Details coming up on the other side.
Bosch electronic seat by Kohler. Wish everything was this intelligent.
Get ready for an immersive journey into the heart of news, politics, and insights that matter. Join India Today now on WhatsApp. Scan the QR code.
अभिजीत भट्टाचार्य से साहित्य आज तक कोलकाता में लाइव। फ्री एंट्री के लिए अभी रजिस्टर करें www.aajtak.in/साहित्य पर या मिस्ड कॉल दीजिए 9310330033 पर। किरकिरे से साहित्य आज तक कोलकाता में लाइव। फ्री एंट्री के लिए अभी रजिस्टर करें www.aajtak.in/साहित्य पर या मिस्ड कॉल दीजिए 9310330033 पर।
Sveda by Kohler. Wish everything cared for your skin.
The Sandeshkhali showdown in Bengal continues to escalate. Mamata Banerjee has now blamed the BJP and the RSS for tensions in the village. This after several women accused TMC Neta Sheikh Shahjahan and his henchmen of rape, abductions and assault. The BJP is saying there is no Mamata left in Mamata Banerjee.
Sandeshkhali showdown has intensified. Protests have now spread outside the restive village. And as tensions escalate, West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee has spoken out. She's blaming the BJP and RSS.
আপনারা জানেন জীবনে আমি কোনো অন্যায়কে কোনোদিন প্রশ্রয় দিইনি এবং আমি ইনিশিয়েটিভ নিয়ে স্টেট কমিশন পাঠিয়েছি, আমাদের অ্যাডমিনিস্ট্রেশন পাঠিয়েছি, 17 জনকে অ্যারেস্ট করা হয়েছে এবং আপনারা দেখেছেন যারা মুখে মাস্ক পরে পরে ছবি তুলছে ধরাও পড়েছে বিজেপির কর্মী।
The West Bengal police says that it is yet to receive any formal complaints of rape and torture. But women in Sandeshkhali reveal a different story.
অত্যাচার হতো, মেয়েদেরকে তুলে নিয়ে যেত, বৌদিকে তুলে নিয়ে যেত, নিয়ে গিয়ে হচ্ছে কি মিটিং এর নাম করে তুলে নিয়ে গিয়ে করতো, টর্চার করতো, কাকে রান্না করাবে, কাকে এ করবে, ভালো ভালো মেয়েদের দেখে হচ্ছে কি ভিতরে রাখবে।
হ্যাঁ, মানে মহিলাদের উপরে প্রচুর পরিমাণে অত্যাচার করা হতো। যেমন রাতের বেলা মহিলাদেরকে তুলে নিয়ে যাওয়া হতো বাড়ির থেকে পার্টি অফিসে, আবার হচ্ছে মিটিং মিছিলের জন্য যখন তখন ডেকে পাঠাতেন। রাত নেই, 10টা নেই, 12টা নেই, যখন ডাকবে তখন যেতে হবে। না যদি যেত তাদের স্বামীদেরকে তুলে নিয়ে গিয়ে পার্টি অফিসে কোদালের ব্যাট দিয়ে মারধর করা হতো। এমনকি ছোট ছোট বাচ্চা শিশুদেরকেও 14-15 বছর বয়সী বাচ্চা শিশুদেরকে নিয়ে গিয়ে তাদের হাতে মদের বোতল এবং হচ্ছে পিস্তল ধরিয়ে দিত যে রাজনীতিতে করতেই হবে, পড়াশুনো করে কি হবে, দিদি তোদের জন্য তোর মাদের লক্ষ্মীর ভাণ্ডার দিচ্ছে, বোনেদের কন্যাশ্রী দিচ্ছে, এত কিছু প্রকল্প দিদি তোদের জন্য দিচ্ছে, কিন্তু তোরা যদি রাজনীতি না করিস তাহলে তোদের বাড়িতে তোর মা বাবাকে খুন করা হবে, মার্ডার করা হবে।
On Thursday, National Scheduled Caste Commission delegation met victims of alleged sexual assault.
जो मुख्यमंत्री है, जहां खुद एक नाम ममता है, मैं फिर बोल रही हूं ममता नाम की चीज नहीं है। आप जितना छुपाना चाहती थी, आप आंकड़े नहीं बताना चाहती हैं क्योंकि आप FIR दर्ज ही नहीं करती हैं। अनुसूचित जाति के लोग उनके साथ आप घर बुला बुला कर टॉर्चर करते हैं। आपके नेता, आप उनको संरक्षण देती हैं, आप उनको संभाल कर अपने पनाह देती हैं। तो आपको मैं चाहती हूं कि देश आपको माफ नहीं करेगा। राष्ट्रपति को बताना चाहते हैं कि यहाँ पे राष्ट्रपति शासन लागू करिए, नहीं तो ये हमारे लोग यहाँ सुरक्षित नहीं रह पाएंगे।
Other than the allegations of sexual harassment and exploitation, there are charges of systematic land grabbing and socio-economic exploitation against Trinamool's Sheikh Shahjahan and his henchmen. But Mamata Banerjee is standing firmly behind her party neta.
একটা এলাকাকে অশান্ত করার চেষ্টা করেছে। আগে টার্গেট শেখ শাহজাহান, ওকে টার্গেট করে ইডি ঢুকলো, তারপরেই সবাইকে বার করে দিয়ে তারপরে ওখানে আদিবাসী মাইনরিটিদের মধ্যে ঝগড়া লাগিয়ে দিল।
Political temperatures are also rising. BJP cadres hit the streets from Hooghly to West Midnapur to South 24 Parganas, where violent clashes were witnessed between Bengal police and BJP workers. BJP President JP Nadda has also formed a fact-finding committee that is headed to Sandeshkhali.
ममता जी को ईओपी में बंद करना चाहिए और उसका पीछे एनआईए लगा देना चाहिए। रोहिंग्या को कौन संरक्षण दिया? यहाँ संदेशखाली में सौरबड़िया में शाहजहां का घर का बगल में 150 रोहिंग्या परिवार को घुसाया। ये बांग्लादेश का बॉर्डर है।
Spine-chilling testimonies and a political showdown that is exploding Sandeshkhali continues to be a big flashpoint in state of war Bengal. Bureau Report, India Today.
Round 3 of Centre Farmers talks has begun in Chandigarh. The Punjab-Haryana border remains restive. At the back of this, a comment made by one of the farm leaders, Jagjit Singh Dallewal, has kicked a storm. Dallewal was caught on camera saying that Modi's rising graph needs to be cut. The BJP is asking, is the farm stir a Kisan Bachao Andolan or a Modi Hatao Andolan?
ਮੋਦੀ ਦਾ ਗ੍ਰਾਫ ਬਹੁਤ ਮੰਦਰ ਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਚੜ ਗਿਆ। ਉਹ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਉਹ ਇਹਦਾ ਗ੍ਰਾਫ ਡਾਊਨ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਆ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ?
A shocking viral video of the most prominent face of the farm stir against popularity of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Jagjit Dallewal, the chief of BKU Ekta, the steering force behind the agitation, expressing his worry over rising popularity of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, especially after Ram Mandir Pran Pratishtha. In the video, Dallewal is heard promising to cut Modi down to size, adding that the farm stir presents a golden opportunity to cut Modi's soaring graph.
ਮੋਦੀ ਦਾ ਗ੍ਰਾਫ ਬਹੁਤ ਮੰਦਰ ਦੇ ਕਰਕੇ ਉੱਪਰ ਚੜ ਗਿਆ। ਉਹ ਨੁਕਸਾਨ ਉਹ ਇਹਦਾ ਗ੍ਰਾਫ ਡਾਊਨ ਕਿਵੇਂ ਆ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ? ਮੈਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਾਰੀ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਪਿੰਡਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤਿਆਰੀਆਂ ਕਰਾਉਂਦਾ ਫਿਰਦਾ ਸੀ, ਬਹੁਤ ਵਾਰੀ ਲੋਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਮੌਕਾ ਬੜਾ ਥੋੜਾ ਹੈ, ਗ੍ਰਾਫ ਉਹਦਾ ਬੜਾ ਉੱਚਾ ਚੜਿਆ ਹੋਇਆ, ਦਿਨ ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲੇ ਥੋੜੇ ਆ। ਕੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨੇ ਥੋੜੇ ਦਿਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਗ੍ਰਾਫ ਇਹਦਾ ਡਾਊਨ ਕਰ ਲਿਆ?
The video was picked up by top advisor to government Kanchan Gupta and prominent BJP leaders, who called the stir a political conspiracy against jealous opponent of the Prime Minister, timed with upcoming elections.
देखते क्या सीधा सीधा पॉलिटिकल एक स्टेटमेंट है ये, और पॉलिटिकल स्टेट में इस प्रकार से कोई एक प्रदर्शन करके, और वो भी एक इस प्रकार का एक खतरनाक दृश्य बना करके उस प्रदर्शन करने से क्या जनता मोदी जी से दूर हट जाएगी? बल्कि ये तो उसमें और बढ़ा रहे हैं। देखा जाए तो आज आम जनता में ये मैसेज जा रहा है कि ये तरीका ठीक नहीं, लोकतांत्रिक तरीका नहीं है। लोकतांत्रिक तरीके को हर कोई पसंद करता है।
The Congress, which has backed the farm stir, however, denied any political affiliations to the protesters.
Agenda of farmers' agitation is an agenda for life of this nation. It's an agenda of 72 crore farmers and farm laborers. This agenda is not governed by politics. This agenda is also not governed by who will be in power. Question is, will India live? Will India survive? Can India survive without its 72 crore farmers and farm laborers?
The farm stir is officially aimed at ensuring fair MSP law and benefits for farmers. But in reality, is it just another Modi Hatao Andolan? Bureau Report, India Today.
Prime Minister Modi is back from his tour of the Middle East today. He had a crucial bilateral with the Emir of Qatar. The meeting came days after 8 Navy veterans were released by the Gulf nation. The Prime Minister has now invited the Emir of Qatar to India. Here's a look at Modi's mission Middle East.
Prime Minister Modi landed in Qatar on his second visit since 2016 on Thursday with a ceremonial welcome. Days after Qatar released 8 Navy veterans who were jailed on espionage charges, this visit by the Indian Prime Minister holds political and diplomatic significance of immense. Accompanied by the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar and National Security Advisor Ajit Doval, the Prime Minister had bilateral talks with the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, and Prime Minister of Qatar, Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdul Rahman Al Thani, focusing on ways to strengthen ties between New Delhi and Doha.
Topics of discussion included a wide range of areas of bilateral cooperation, including trade partnership, investment cooperation, energy partnership, issues engaged in regional security, cultural affinity, and people-to-people ties.
Qatar is the largest supplier of LNG to India, accounting for over 48% of India's global LNG imports. This Middle East country is also India's largest supplier of LPG, accounting for 29% of India's total LPG imports. Besides LNG, India also imports ethylene, propylene, ammonia, urea, and polyethylene from Qatar. The bilateral trade between the two countries have been growing in volumes as well as in the past few years. While India looks forward to ensuring this stable trade relations further, the recent release of the Indian nationals has added a positive dimension to the relations between the two nations.
Prime Minister thanked His Highness the Emir for his support for the welfare of the Indian community, and in this regard expressed his deep appreciation to His Highness the Emir for the release of 8 Indian nationals of Al Dahra Company.
On his arrival in Doha, the Prime Minister was greeted warmly by the Indian diaspora outside his hotel. People carrying Indian tricolour and gifts for Prime Minister Modi chanted Modi Modi and Bharat Mata Ki Jai. Prime Minister Modi shook hands with them. They also took pictures of Prime Minister Modi as he interacted with them. Bureau Report, India Today.
This is where we wrap up the Newstrack tonight. For your time and your trust, thank you very much. Tomorrow I'll have an edition of the Political Stock Exchange where we look at how voters and farmers